Well, I think we're all pleased to be here. And I, for one, have only come to Bangladesh for the very first time 2 days ago to be part of this festival. And a big part of the festival has been the debate, partly to do with the Women of the World Festival that I created, the debate around women and men living in a different way together in the future. When I started the Women of the World Festival in London, which is now in many different countries and many different regions, I didn't call it Feminists Unite or the feminist principle. I didn't use feminism as the starting point for the invitation. I basically said if you are a woman, or you know a woman, or you'd like to be a woman, then the festival will be for you. And the reason for that was because I didn't want anybody who could be interested in the idea of a different kind of world where men and women lived differently. I didn't want them to be deterred by a word that some people found and still find troubling. I'm a feminist, but I know that some people find the word difficult, and there's a historical reason for that, and there may be other reasons for that, which we'll discuss together. But essentially, the enthusiasm for human rights and the enthusiasm for progress in society is something which, obviously, you're all here because you're enthusiasts. And there's a lot of men here as well as a lot of women. So I just wanted to say that Women of the World was to use the word women as a proud and excited idea. But in those 6 years since Women of the World Festival was founded, I have noticed, and this is just from my perspective, from where I sit in the UK, that the word feminist has been brushed off and recovered. Not entirely, but there are many 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, as well as 80-year-olds who are happily saying, I'm a feminist. And this I find very heartening. And I think that part of this has come out of some of the catastrophic news of events that have happened to girls and women, as well as some of the incredibly positive stories. So, I mean, this is, from my point of view, I would be extremely happy if the word felt like an energetic enjoyment of the idea of equal rights or human rights, but I don't know how the rest of my panelists feel about this because we haven't discussed it yet. So I'm going to pass over to I'll pass over to you, and I'll pass the baton to you.
To talk about what I think about feminism.
Yeah, that's our brief, isn't it?
Okay.
Is feminism the F word?
I think it is still the F word, definitely. I mean, I proudly call myself a feminist, but I myself went through the phase where I would say, yes, I believe in this and this, but I'm not a feminist. Largely because, I mean, when I was a kid, or when there was no Google or internet actually, we didn't necessarily look up comments or what a word like feminism might mean. So to me, one of the first times we would get into debates about equality and things like that was school and then university. And when at university was the first time I was having that debate with someone, and I said that sentence, the sentence which we dread or we raise eyebrows at other women and men for saying, I believe in equality and I think men and women should be equal, but I'm not a feminist. And then I thought, wait, I don't actually know what feminism means well enough, so I should go and read up on it. And thankfully at that point, internet was there, and I could. So I did. Google wasn't there yet, but internet was there. And that was my entry to where I finished all my reading and looking it up and the controversies about it, the debates about it, the negatives about it, how the movement has evolved. And I came out of it saying, no, I'm a feminist. And I'm going to say that from now on because I believe it's a word which has had a lot to do. There's a lot of history to it. There's obviously things which people have done at different times, which we may not agree with all the time. But it has brought us to a point which we obviously cherish, and we like the fact where we are, and that has come about in a way. And I think it's a word just like any other movement. It's moving, and it changes with time. And what my feminism might be, it can differ from someone else's feminism, but at the end of the day, our belief is the same, our aim is the same, and we try to work it in different ways and get there. So yeah, definitely a proud feminist.
We have to decide whether to defer to beauty or age. Take a vote.
Stop it. I'm waiting to decide.
Okay, all right. I'd really like to hear from you. Go for it? Okay, okay. Okay, so what do I believe? Is feminism the next F word? I don't know. I don't know if F words are things to be actually particularly happy about, because they're not. The F word as it has existed has been a bit of a swear word, and I'm not particularly happy with equating feminism, which is something much deeper, with it. I call myself a feminist without any embarrassment or any fear or anything. Feminism to me is as I live and breathe. It is what I believe in. It is what makes me who I am. It is what I will own with pride and joy and everything. But I also feel that labels are what you make of them. They can be enabling. They can be enabling and they can be constraining. And for people who do not wish to own labels, as many, many women in our countries do not wish to own the label feminism, for a variety of reasons, because historically the term as it exists in English is something that has come to us from the West, even though our feminist movements or our women's movements are indigenous movements that often predate a lot of what has happened in the West. But nevertheless, people feel that this is a term that has been imposed from outside, and they feel hesitant to own it, and I think that's fine. I don't think it really matters whether you call yourself that or you don't call yourself that, and I think if you want to call yourself that and you're happy about it, that's great. As an activist in the women's movement in India and a publisher, what I have noticed is the ways in which my own understanding of feminism has changed, and the understanding or the owning or not owning of the concept has changed in the world around me. And I'll give you an example just out of my profession, that when in the mid-80s we started publishing books by women, and we called ourselves a feminist publishing house, 99.9999% of men would run from our publishing house and would not want to be published by us because it would embarrass them. And actually a large number of women also would not want to be published by us because they felt that it would not give them the so-called, within quotes, neutral credentials that they might be seeking to move ahead in life. And if the credentials were politically aligned, then they would somehow be less or lacking or inferior. Things have changed 30 years on, and I have to say that now more men than ever are taken with the question of whether they can be feminists or not, whether they can call themselves feminists. What will women activists say to them, and will they allow them or see them to be as feminists? And certainly they want to be published by a feminist publishing house, which they never would have before. Earlier it would embarrass them, now they see it as a badge of honor. And I think also the women's movement, in its understanding of and activism around issues of multiple, ambivalent, liminal, marginalized identities, especially minority, transgenders, and so on and so forth, is expanding and complicating its own understanding of feminism and who it includes and who it involves and so on. So I think the word, the concept changes, and ownership of it changes, acceptance of it changes. It really doesn't matter if it's the next F word or not, but for a long time it will come to define the ways in which we relate to our society across genders, between genders, and with genders.
Good afternoon. May I just begin by thanking the organizers of this marvelous jewel of a Lit Fest. We are all extremely proud and happy to be here. And the Dhaka Lit Fest has grown from something which was small and meaningful to something that's even more meaningful and can only grow bigger with each year. And we are very, very happy to have the writers who had the courage to be here. And we are also very disappointed with the writers who opted out. So we are here to express our solidarity with Dhaka and with the Lit Fest. So thank you very much for inviting all of us. Having said that, I have no problem with the F word in whichever context it's used. I think that is the strongest thing I can say about being tolerant, about differences. And the word feminism itself is pretty loaded, and it has a political agenda that I'm not always in tune with. I like the idea of gender neutrality. It's too idyllic. But in a world where we are talking about equality and the same opportunities and the same rights and the same dignity and the same respect for every human being, I hate the idea of a world that is so clearly delineated into I'm a woman and I'm a man and I'm a feminist and I'm a woman and not a feminist and I'm a man but a feminist. It suggests a kind of I don't like the idea of confrontational politics because I don't think that confrontational politics have got the world very far. Of course, we have to work together, men and women. It's not men versus women. It's not men and women opposed to each other, fighting for some kind of, whatever it may be. We have to do it together. And the more energy we spend doing that together, in the interest not just of women of the world, but of the men of the world as well, I just believe it will be a more successful movement. And it won't alienate a lot of people. Like Urvashi was saying, that a lot of people initially used to wonder what is a feminist publishing house and, stay away from it. Despite the fact that feminism has been redefined, will continue to be redefined, and each generation will have its own version of what it means to be a woman in the world, not exactly or only a feminist in the world. That a movement of this kind helps in crystallizing your own feelings about yourself to begin with, your own sense of worth within your own family, the context which is most important to you, perhaps community, perhaps in a much bigger way. It starts with that. It starts with a girl child feeling what she feels when she's born a girl child into a family that either accepts her or rejects her, or cultures and communities that make it evident to her that she is not wanted. That feeling of rejection, of alienation, of being the other, somehow, less privileged person. I mean, it requires the efforts of everybody, not just feminists. It requires the efforts starting with the father of the house, the mother, both of them working towards making that little girl feel as much a wanted, cherished, loved member of a family. So if we try and talk feminism to very young children who may not have the emotional and the intellectual resources to understand the complexity of that word, because at the end of it all, differences are brought about. There are two conditions that lead to differences being exaggerated, and both those conditions we deal with not just as women, but men deal with them too. And these are cultural and religious differences that make sure that men and women are kept apart in many, many different forms. We have to break through that. We have to break through prejudice on so many levels. It's not easy. Women's lives are not easy. But increasingly today in this world, nor are men's lives that much easier. So I think what we need to do is create a more simpatico, some more empathy for one another as human beings, rather than me as a woman saying, I want more of this because I am a woman, I'm a feminist, we have been oppressed for centuries, we have been repressed for centuries, this is my time, and onward, sisters. so far, I haven't seen it working as effectively, even in the West, where the struggle was a very different struggle. It was really about having equal opportunities in the workplace more than anything else. But in this region, feminism has different emotional connotations. And we should be sensitive to those. We should be sensitive. Each woman in each context, whichever that context may be, has to be sensitive to that particular context and not use some kind of a magic wand or a formula that says, now I'm calling myself a feminist and hey, everything's going to change because I'm going to go out there and I'm going to militate and I'm going to agitate and I'm going to get things for myself and for the next generation that has been denied to the previous generations. Now, for someone who was very much a part of the 60s and the 70s when this whole feminist awareness took off internationally and globally, I was very confused at that point. And here's a confession. I'm still confused. I'm just trying to be a better human being. That's it.
I just like to pick up on some of the things that you've all said. And also some of the reasons why I think, I mean, I don't know what the F word means here, but obviously in the UK it means a swear word. So, I mean, that idea of...
Let me spell it out. F-U-C-K.
Okay, so it means the same thing.
Now it's said.
Okay.
It's done.
So I'm glad you were able to say that. As a guest, I didn't feel I was able to just go straight there. But the reason why, you know, feminism is an F word for some is because of the idea that it is automatically embedded in anger, that it is automatically embedded in conflict, and I suppose centrally that it is automatically embedded in antagonism or hostility towards men. And still men and women come to me and say, how can I be a feminist? I love my husband. Or how can I be a feminist? I have a lovely brother. And I have to say, I have a gorgeous partner, a lovely ex-husband as well. And I have a fantastic dad and a lovely son, and I love men. I don't think that feminism was ever intended to be a hostility towards men. I think the confusion is that if you look at something called patriarchy, and as you said, patriarchy is in every theology. Every scripture endorses the idea of a world order that commits men to have to be the senior voice and commits women to have to obey finally this senior voice, which is a tremendous tension, a tremendous and problematic tension. That theological beginning then has been inscribed into lawmaking. And many of those laws, of course, have become completely unacceptable. Maybe they were always unacceptable, actually, but the issue of property, women as property, or women not being able to own property, these are some of the things that are right at the heart of a patriarchal system. Now, when people say they're anti-capitalist, and you then say, well, that's a nice dress you've bought, or that's a nice house you live in, or that's a nice car you drive, you know that there's a problem of kind of generalization of words. What they really mean is, I dislike the excesses of unfettered capitalism. And I think when people say, I don't like feminists, what they mean is, please don't dislike me as a man. Or please don't dislike me because I've chosen to be a mother and stay at home. So all of these ideas that feminism is somehow beginning with the idea of hostility, that's why you align it with the fuck word. It sounds like that, but I do believe that that's actually for two reasons. I think that when groups of women suddenly open their eyes to their lack of power historically, it's not surprising that sometimes they get cross. It's just not surprising. And you have to live through that anger in people as they experience it as a hurt. You know, it's baffling. It's baffling for women to be told that they're not liked just because they are women. It's baffling to women to know that they can be raped because they are women. you know, you're nodding. It's baffling. And I suppose it's baffling to women to think, but if men are supposed to look after us, not that we necessarily want them to, but that's what we've been told, why aren't you? So you can see how anger has been a product of enlightenment. But anger is only one bit along the road of enlightenment. Eventually, that anger changes, and you have to return to love. As you say, you have to return to the idea that as a human, you love another human. And how do you find a way of changing the way you live together? So one product of feminism has been this anger that's been triggered by realization. And a second product of feminism is actually the great ability it has provided newspapers and the media to double up on making fun of women. And from everything from burning bras, which I think only happened once as a comedy gesture by some performance artists, everything from burning bras to, you know, shaving under your armpits or whatever the equivalent is here of humiliating women, the word feminist has become something that lots of young fashionable women would run a mile from because they go, well, I don't want to be like that. So I think that your generation and the younger generation have been reclaiming the word, saying it's not a hate word, it's not an aggressive word, and it doesn't particularize the kind of woman who has it. It's not about work, it's not about domesticity, it's about belief in equality. Now, you can't be a feminist believing in equality and not also care about poverty. You can't be a feminist and believe in equality and not care about every other human right. Otherwise, that's just hypocrisy. But you can believe that questioning patriarchy, which is so hard to do and so confusing and will take a very long time, you can say that's the root of a lot of most of our troubles, and what would happen if we imagined a world that was different.
May I just ask a question which I don't have an answer to, but perhaps you do, all of you, because you've studied the subject with commitment and passion for a much longer time. And you say patriarchy is the root of all problems, but I'd be interested to know, in a matriarchal system, are women that much happier? I'm not sure at all, because everything at the end of the day, it's about power structures. The minute you get power, and the minute you have power over family, property, money, and how the family will be spending that money or inheriting that money, there is just one form of behavior, which is the bullying pattern, and it doesn't spare women either. You give most women who acquire power, snatch it, grab it, get it, behave exactly like the worst versions of men. Then don't even behave, they don't even take the better attributes of men. They are just awful. So I wonder whether patriarchy and matriarchy, or is it power that is really at the root of all problems of gender differences?
Okay, I'm going to answer that, because it is interesting that when you suggest that patriarchy should be dissolved, people think you are saying, and will replace it with matriarchy. So, which I think is not the same as saying we will dissolve a power structure of inequality. I mean, because in theory, anti-apartheid, you could all be part of anti-apartheid. It wasn't just for black South Africans. It was for anybody who didn't believe in inequality. You weren't saying, well, we'll replace it with black dominance. So I agree with you. Power corrupts. If you give power to one group and it happens to have been men, it will be corrupting. If you replace it by giving it to women, it will be just as corrupting. What we're talking about, and this is the other problem, you say to somebody, I want women to have equal rights, and they say to you, well, what will it be like if women take over? And I said, I never mentioned women taking over. But the fear is that you're talking about reversal, and that's not what we should be imagining. Tiffany, what do you think about younger?
Tasaffy.
Tasaffy,
It's
sorry.
a difficult name, I know. Yeah, I was actually going to step in right now because I think, like I was saying, I think feminism has gone through a movement, and I think it makes sense, and I think that's what the panel is called, to talk about what feminism stands for now and where it's heading to. And as a feminist, I think I pride myself on the fact that my focus area is aiming for something where there's nothing called gender. That's what I hope for. That, to me, is the utopian world. And I can get into a whole conversation about that, why I think that makes sense, and why half of the issues about homosexuality and transgender and all of these things will not even exist if you don't have anything called gender to start with. But I'm not going to get into that right now. What I'm going to talk about is on me focusing on men and the kind of work I do right now. One of the ideas is, one, making men look at women as an equal partner, not just in life, but just going around, seeing, at work, sitting next to you, every other way. At the same time, I think that one of the current focuses of feminism globally has been about including men. And not just in the idea of how men should treat women, but how men treat themselves, how men treat other men. And quite frankly, I have not heard of any man's movement talking about that. I've heard the feminist movement talking about that, and I've heard feminist women talking about that, and I've heard feminist men talking about that, and I've heard men who come to women's feminist movement stuff and talk about it. Frankly, I think it is the feminist movement which has brought this out, and it is one of the current issues that is being talked about globally, about what are the, I'm not going to say men as a problem, I'm going to say issues of masculinity which have created certain power plays, which leads to certain issues which we're talking about. And by masculinity, I don't mean men masculine, I mean masculinity as a way of acting, as a way of behavior. Even as a kid, when we are taught to be equal, we are taught to be more like a boy. I used to hate being called girl because I didn't want to be girly. I wanted to be out and running and playing sports, and all those things did not equate to being girly. They equated to being boyish, and I proudly took on the word tomboy because that fit into the idea of what that meant. But quite frankly, if you think about it, that's just being a child being a child. You're supposed to be able to run around and play and do all those things that apparently are only meant for boys to be doing. And it took me my own time to get to the point where I realized how degrading that was to myself, to think that I shouldn't be girly, because that's a bad thing to be, because that meant I shouldn't be doing the things that I love to do at that point. And I think those are things which patriarchy, for lack of a better way of defining it, tells us from throughout our lives. And those are the things which, throughout our lives, we figured out how feminism is talking about. And I think that's the platform that feminism provided me. That's the character or personality I gained when I decided to be a feminist, is that those are the things I can talk about, and I had ways to explain it. And to me right now, that's also the same thing. When I talk about men, when I talk to men, and when I talk about the issues that they're not being able to express or feel, or the roles they're not being able to play because it doesn't work for them, because masculinity and patriarchy says those are not the positions for men to have. And to me, that's the problem. That's my problem with patriarchy, because it defines people not as individuals, but as what sex organ you're born with, and that's it.
Okay, let me come in here on this. I am often told by people, hey, you don't look like a feminist. And I really wonder what feminists look like. My standard response to that is, actually, I left my horns at home today. Normally, I would wear them. But there is a lot of ignorance, and there are a lot of stereotypes about who feminists are, where we come from, and what feminism is. As a political movement, it is a movement about which very, very little is known. We still don't know how many bras were burnt. And I tend to agree with Jude that it was just one, because women are just too practical to burn such an expensive garment, even for ideology. But nevertheless, we know so little about it. For example, if you're looking at an ideology like Marxism or socialism, there is a history you can trace back, and that allows you to look at it and understand it and see what it comprises. With feminism, that is not the case. There is not a given easy history, and the histories that we have are very different depending on where you're located. So for example, a history of feminism in Bangladesh would look totally different from a history of feminism in the United States, or even from a history of feminism in India. And I think that ignorance of the history leads us to assume stereotypes about it, and to assume hostility, and to assume all sorts of things, that feminists are homebreakers, this, that, and the other. What I think feminism is trying to do is to deal with the very troubled questions that everybody on the panel has outlined, which is, what are the structures of power that exist in a home and the world that make it possible to ignore 1/2 of humanity, that make it possible to assume that just because they have the bodies they are born with, they don't have the brains or the capabilities to lead them into the world. What is it that made it possible, for example, in my career in publishing, for my bosses to assume that just because I was a woman, I did not have the capability to get to the top of my profession? And what was it that then therefore left me with no option but to say, I will opt out and do my own thing? Many women live through this. So that is one thing. The second thing is, why is feminism so difficult to articulate and difficult to get across? Because it questions the structures of power also in the most intimate spaces of our lives. And in those intimate spaces, or those intimate spaces are inhabited by people we love. Our fathers, our brothers, everybody. These are relationships of love, caring, tenderness, and these are also relationships which, if they carry violence in them, they are really difficult to deal with. How do you deal with rape inside the home by your chacha? What do you do? Who do you talk to? Who do you tell? He's a man you love. He's raping you. You don't know who to talk to. Nobody will believe you. So this is the kind of history, these are the kind of questions that feminists come with. Also, I think it's really, really important to remember that feminism is the only movement in the world, the only movement, and I don't say this because I'm a feminist, but I say it out of knowledge and from innumerable examples. It is the only movement that has been able to ally with and align with other movements. Why is it that the environmental movement and the women's movement are so close across the world? Why is it that Marxists were never able to take on the question of religion, but feminists were? How does religion divide us? How does it offer women some solace, some identity, some space? How do we deal with it? Why is it, if you look at your own history in Bangladesh, just ask yourself, why were the Mukti Jodhas treated one way and the Biranganas another way? Is that not a question for looking at what feminism is saying to us about our societies? And I think we cannot stop asking these deep questions, these difficult and profound and complex questions, because they are about relationships of power and love and the intertwining of these relationships. We cannot stop asking them, and we cannot reject feminism simply because it asks them, but because we are fearful of it, because we don't understand it. And of course, imagine if feminism was taken to its logical conclusion, what would it do? It would transform the relations of power, and that is a very frightening thing for men and women. How do we deal with that transformed reality? So I think these are things we have to understand about this political movement, which is, to me, one of the most important movements that has happened in the world in the last half century or last century. And you can't just dismiss it as antagonistic or trying to replace, sorry, Shobhaa, 99% of the time I'm in agreement with Shobhaa, but replacing patriarchy with matriarchy, no feminist. It doesn't, yes, it does not, and but no feminist in the world has ever said matriarchy is the answer to patriarchy. No. Instead, they've said, ask how power relations are solidified and try to counter that.
Okay. I'd like to get some microphones into the audience, if we could. Are there any microphones in the audience?
All the feminist statements get no applause. You
No, that's not true.
Everything
That's
else
not true.
Yeah, come on. I've just given a rousing speech and you just 2 or 3 weeks.
Hey! Just one thing I wanted to say, which was that I started a festival called BAM, Being a Man, to go with WOW, Women of the World, for the very reason that you talked about, which is that actually, I don't know what it's like here, but in the UK, the highest reason for male death under 40 is suicide. And if you think about that in terms of the impact of depression on men, the inability to talk about problems, the inability to share problems, the inability to admit to vulnerability, these are huge issues that we're beginning to realize that men need spaces to talk about these things too. Now, could you put your hands up if you'd like to contribute to this debate? Okay, well, use my
darling,
microphone.
can I just end with one note on, so it's something that we can all think about, that the next time we have a discussion on feminism, let it include men in it too, not just a women's panel.
Okay.
Then we'll talk about equality. We must hear it for what men have to think of, what they feel about it. And I believe that when Mao Zedong said women hold up half the sky, we do. But there are men holding the other half. So let's have the men in.
I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, so we've got a woman here and a man there. Now, how's that for equality? Right.
You know, I've been working on these issues for a very long time.
It is on. Just hold it nearer, that's all.
Yeah. I've been working on these issues for a very long time. And like all of you, I have lots of men that I love. It is very hard to get men to come out and talk. I don't know what the problem is, but little by little, and this is the change that we are seeing, that younger men are not as threatened by the idea of identifying themselves as feminists as my generation of men. They were a problem. But the second point I want to make is, you've all talked about feminism. I think we have to acknowledge there are many different kinds of feminisms. What we are talking about, different kinds of feminisms. Many feminists remain angry, and we need that anger. Other feminists go out and work in many different ways, which are perhaps much more,
Conciliatory.
Conciliatory, less adversarial. But you need that whole spectrum.
Correct.
To go back to Mao Zedong, let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Okay, thank you. Let 1,000 versions of feminism bloom. There's a man over there with sunglasses. Could you give him the microphone?
What would be great is a man who's a feminist in the audience to come up and make his statement. That would be fantastic.
Well, I don't know if that's a lot of pressure on this guy. Hold on. Right.
I'm not a feminist at all.
No, let him speak. Hey.
Oh, ma'am. And I'm scared that 4 ladies are sitting over there. So, my question is that, so welcome to Bangladesh, and my question is that, the way women are objectified in the films, in the advertisements that you see every day.
The way men are or women are?
Women are.
Women are, yeah.
Men are too sometimes nowadays. Okay. So I think that even the women filmmakers who are making film, they also portray the women figure as a kind of object. So, and this is increasing in an alarming rate. You know better than me. And is there any solution for that? I mean, in this capitalist world, how do you find solution? And women voluntarily are involving with those things. So they are somehow, I'm sorry to say, of course you'll say that this is the problem of the patriarchy, but somehow women are also volunteering this to involve themselves and objectify themselves in the way. One example is, I'm sorry. One example, I was in Bonani. Sorry for the Bonani people, but I'm not that way. So I was just standing over there, and 3 little guys are talking about that, this is a nice figure. If I could have got her one night for, $1 million or something like that. And what he was mentioning, right? He was mentioning a car, and the car has been objectified as a girl.
Okay, we've
Thank
got that.
you.
Thank you. It's a very good point. I'm going to take 2 or 3 points, and then we'll answer them all in one go. There's a gentleman there with an orange thing. There's a gentleman at the back there with a beard also. Well, look, do you want to?
Someone, a freelance journalist, how many feminine publications in the subcontinent? Number of publications, feminine publications in the subcontinent, how many? Thank you.
In the subcontinent. How many publications?
Huh.
How many women's publications in the subcontinent? Okay,
Yeah,
we'll come to that in a second. And there's only men's hands up at the moment. Do you want to pass it to that man? Yeah. Any women want? Have you got a statement you want to make as well? Yeah. Okay. Yes. This chap there. Yep.
Okay. So the CEO of Yahoo, Marissa Myers, quote unquote, said, "I don't think I would consider myself a feminist. I do think feminist has become, in many ways, a more negative word." How would you address these women that feel that way, that feminism has become a negative word?
Okay. Well, should we take those 3 questions? There's the objectification of women. First of all, and then we'll come back to some more questions. Yeah.
Women, okay. Objectification of women. I think that's just something we have at the moment. And I think the more we make them objects, the more they become objects. So, quite frankly, my question to you would be, what stops you from telling those men that, don't talk about a woman like that? That's a human being. Stop talking like that. What stops you from doing that? Because if I'm somewhere and someone says something like that to me, or to someone around me, I would take that step. I would stop someone from doing that. But somehow, it's supposed to be women who are supposed to do that for themselves and for other women. What stops a man from saying that to another man? That would be my question to you. So maybe next time you're in that situation, think about that. About objectification as a whole, yes, it's a system. It's been there. It's part of capitalism. It's part of marketing. But I think marketing is also changing. If you see a lot of the Indian ads nowadays, and I love seeing these ads, where they're talking about the man washing the dishes with the woman, or about the smart washing machine where they're making a mockery about how the man never uses a washing machine. I think it's changing. It's changing because our audiences are changing, because marketing and people who are in media are also understanding that your target audience wants more than item song, wants more than the half-naked woman holding up a product. They want more involved understanding, more targeted media marketing and advertisements and movies as well. There used to be movies which would show the husband going off with another woman, and the wife has to become sexy and start dancing and become interesting to get her estranged husband back. Now there are movies which are showing a woman deciding that she doesn't want to be in a marriage, where she wants to get a divorce, even though he's not abusive, he gives her money. And what's the third point? There's 3 points where women are allowed
Women's
to.
publishing.
No, I was saying there's 3. There's usually in South Asia, if you say why a woman is getting divorced, there's 3
Drunk.
reasons. No,
Yes,
doesn't beat you up.
Doesn't beat you up, doesn't drink, and gives you money.
No, there's
3,
another one.
and has great sex with you. Or
had
doesn't
an
have
affair.
sex with you.
No, hasn't had an affair.
Oh, okay.
Forget having sex with you.
Forget about having
That's not
sex
even
with you.
important.
Oh, that's not even important. Okay, fine.
So those are the 3 points, and they're showing that in movies nowadays in Bollywood. So,
But-
things are changing because the conversation is changing.
Yeah, I think the big change in Bollywood, since I think we are discussing the objectification of women primarily in cinema in Southeast Asia, and Bollywood does dominate that space. You may be happy to note that men are being shown in less and less and less, and they're being hosed down, they're being shown under waterfalls. Shah Rukh Khan, John Abraham, Salman Khan's shirt sort of rips off all by itself, unaided, it does happen very naturally. And so in the objectification game, I think it goes both ways. It's commercially driven, marketing driven, and no one's holding a gun to anyone's head. The girls are free to make a choice whether to be projected in bikinis or not projected in bikinis, just as Salman has the choice to keep his shirt on in future movies. So I think we're getting...
Okay, I have a quick answer to your question about how many women publications, and my answer is not nearly enough. There is a long way to go. And I just want to remind you all about the consequence of all these Bollywood guys who are now baring their chests, that they have developed their muscles so much that they can't straighten their arms. They have to walk like this, and they can't even hold their arms together like this. Have you seen Salman Khan and John Abraham when they walk like this? They can't get their arms straight.
Okay, I'm going to take your point about the CEO of, was it Yahoo? Which is that I think that there are a lot of women and men, particularly in the corporate field, who are nervous in the way that we're discussing the word. We've already acknowledged the word feminist might suggest to people that it equals hostility. And at a corporate senior level, you'd be nervous of doing that. And in a sense, the question that you posed and the way that you posed it, which we're grateful for, by the way, kind of hinted at that, because you began by saying you were quite frightened to put a question to 4 women. And you began by, and I think if we hadn't been called feminists, you wouldn't have said that. So there's already an indication that you are nervous of women who might not like a man, even though we said we did. And, you know, you look very nice to me, and that's not objectifying you. And I think on the issue of objectification, the problem is that it's all very well saying, you know, women have a choice. Well, in the labour market, we have what choices are given to us. And actually, for a lot of women in the area of modelling or acting or whatever, the implication to them straight away is they must be prepared to be objectified. Otherwise, they're just difficult and they won't get work. So, you know, people make lots of compromises in their lives to fit in with the society as it currently is. Now, there are 2 people back there, a man and a woman. And I think you're both going to talk. Is that right? Okay, so there's microphones right at the back there. If we could, there's a man with he's got a shirt on saying Venezia, Italia, and there's a woman who's got 2 next to him who's with glasses. Somebody here, and then there's 2 at the front here. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take 2 questions there and 2 questions at the front, and they'll be all the questions that we can take, I'm afraid. Yes, thank you.
Can I just make a comment, like in general? I think women are just beautiful, and that we all appreciate the beauty of women. So it's not about making women an object, but I am a woman, and the moment I stepped in here, I just couldn't stop noticing how beautiful all the women are.
I think men are beautiful too.
And exactly, that's my second point, that we women do also check out men. So it's like it goes either way.
It's a big love-in. Yes.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. It's God's creation. So we should appreciate the beauty of both men and women.
Thank you.
Small difference, we don't molest the men yet.
Sorry, yes, and the man. Oh, sorry, there's a man here. There's a man there. Hello, hello, the microphone. Sorry, you missed the man at the back. No. Sorry, can you let him speak?
Question is, if we were meant to be equal, why has God created us of different sizes? Why are men taller, bigger, more muscular, and women are weaker in size?
Okay, thank you.
Largely.
There's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good question. All good questions. There's one lady here with green and glasses here, and she'll be the last after this man with a Venezia T-shirt.
Hello. We come from a country that was based on agriculture, right? Our lands were fertile. We needed men. We needed strong men to work in the fields. We needed women to work at home. And that idea has been planted in our heads. I get that. But feminism amongst my friends, my feminist friends, my female friends, they're studying really hard. They want to graduate within 2.5 years. All because so that they have a certificate so that they can get married into a family. They have a father-in-law who's affluent enough to give them a security for the rest of their lives. I have many friends who take 7-8 courses a semester just so they can get married. And they want to be pampered. I don't want to sound like a chauvinist, but they want to be pampered. They want to be taken care of.
Okay, I think we have a lot of men and women here. Women, raise your arms. Women, raise your arms if you want to be pampered and taken care of. How many of the women want to be pampered and taken care of?
Sometimes.
How many men want to be pampered and taken care of?
I do. Sometimes.
Exactly. Sometimes everybody wants to be pampered and taken care of.
But your point doesn't equal the reason why half of the human race should be made to feel unequal,
No,
does
but,
it?
In
No.
a country,
Sorry, we didn't.
Hello.
Yeah.
For a country like Bangladesh, right? When you talk about feminism, when you put things in isms and you box it out, people don't understand. They get the wrong meaning of it. And
Same when you say Islamism,
Thank you.
right?
Okay, we'll
But
go to this
that's how it
person here.
works.
You've made a good point.
Can I add to his question a bit? Like, for instance,
Actually, no. Sorry. We've got one more person down here with the green and the glasses. It's you. Yes, stand up and grab the microphone. Stand up. Take the microphone.
Who is the green?
Grab it. Yes. Can I give her the microphone, please?
Yes, I was hoping you'd talk about your, how you feel about feminism as it is today, fourth wave feminism. Where is it going wrong? What's it doing right? That's it.
Okay. Who wants to pick up on some of these questions? Oh. All right. So there are some points that I think are related here. One lady over here said, well, if we were supposed to be equal, why has God made men physically stronger and taller than women, which seems to tie in with, and if there are so many women who basically would like to get married and pampered, then isn't there some level of kind of accepting the status quo that's going on? Well, I can give an answer which may not be respectful from some religious people's point of view. I personally think that in the way that the universe evolves, I think that God is an evolving concept, an evolving understanding, and that I don't believe that a loving God would ever create inequality as part of the world order. Now, that's my belief. And I think that there have been times in human physical development when brute strength was necessary and nurturing was necessary. But those binaries of this is what women do and this is what men do, I think we have evolved away from those places. And, there are small Japanese men that even I could sumo wrestle with. And I'm not saying anything about Japanese men. All I'm saying is that this business of size and differential, it's a reductive place to put ourselves in, I believe. And actually in the 21st century, talking about fourth wave feminism, we're really talking about what ideas do we need to make the world work. And the ideas are as likely to come from women as they are from men. And unless we let those ideas come forward, I think we're doing the human race a disservice.
May I come in here, Jude? Just want to say the question of sizes of human beings, who's big and who's small, has nothing to do with God. And for those who don't believe there is a God, it has even less to do with God. And for those who believe God is a woman, if she is there, it's very difficult. So look around you at the world. I mean, why is it you mentioned Japanese men? Why is it that Japanese men and women are today much taller than they used to be? Because of changes in the diet, better health care, greater life expectancy, and so on and so forth. Why is it that women are much smaller in many of our cultures? Because they are not fed as much. Because they are denied health care. All of these things. Why is it that in Western countries, women are actually closer in height and size to men? For similar reasons. The only question it doesn't answer is why does Salman Khan have the muscles he does? Because he's, testosterone himself up, and many women do not do that. And I would say to the question about fourth wave feminism, that as far as I'm concerned, these notions of first wave, second wave, third wave, etc., are notions that do not belong to the political reality that I have lived with. Our feminism is homegrown, and it doesn't respond to the waves or the post-feminists that come from outside. We have to really look at our history in that. And it's evolving, growing, and it is absolutely necessary to our development. So fourth wave, chuck it.
Excuse me, may I make a
just make a point. Just when that question came up about the muscular, why men are more muscular than women, and the man replied that maybe strength was required for the agriculture. In matriarchal society, the women are the ones who work in the land. They are the ones who do it. So muscle has nothing to do with it. But even in a matriarchal society, which I thought our tribal societies are matriarchal, but I don't know how matriarchal is a matriarchal society, because at the end of the day, even in matriarchy, you know, the women are working in the fields, they're taking care of the household and everything, but at the end of the day, the return of the crop, the control comes to the man's hand.
Yeah.
That's it. And another thing, since the word feminism and feminist is being so much feared, why don't we use a new word, maybe humanism and humanist? I don't know. I mean, if that would make things better or more acceptable to everybody.
Thank you. Do you want to say something?
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, since we are discussing muscles at great length, I think a muscular mind may be the answer. So it doesn't leave out either gender.
Yeah. And I think that since we began by praising the festival, and I completely agree, you know, what we're really talking about is complexity. It's tremendously complex. We've sat through together now for an hour and a quarter talking about the texture of a word, the history of a word, the history of a word that is not yet finished in its history. It's got a long, 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 long journey. And the great thing is that we came together to debate it, and we didn't have an argy-bargy, we didn't fight. And I think that's to be commended. So I think, you know, I found myself in a situation of moderating, but I'd like to thank ourselves and thank the audience.